So jazz, the first fact you're going to know about it, it is America's first true form of music. So does this mean we had no music in America before jazz? Absolutely not. We did have a music in America before jazz. But jazz is the first music that is truly American. And what I mean by that, if you lived in the United States before the Civil War, let's pick a date of 1850, just because 1850 is easy to remember. It's not a weird date like 1895 or 1843, which are dates we're really going to be dealing with. But let's say 1850. If you lived in the United States before 1850 and you were a musician, first of all, you'd have struggled to make a living because we didn't have a whole lot of money in the United States before the Civil War. We were a developing country. But the main thing is you would have been doing music of Europe. So I noticed somebody yesterday, I don't know if it was in this class, said that jazz is like classical, or they're the same. No, they're not. Classical music comes from Europe. It comes from Germany. It comes from Italy, mainly those two countries, and England came into the ball game a little later. But American music did not start until jazz. And here is why. Jazz took a whole new set of rules. So you have two different ways of doing music, especially in the mid-1800s. Well, only one way. You had the European way. And luckily, these slaves who were uneducated, at least formally uneducated in a school, and they didn't have money to buy instruments, they had to invent a new way of making music. So let's think about what they did not have. They did not have formal training in music as you would in Europe. So a lot of these slaves had no idea how music really worked. They didn't understand how to read it. They didn't understand how to play it, at least not by the rules dictated by the rich white people in Europe. Does that make sense? Shake your head yes, or give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. So what did these slaves do? They started doing what people do. They started making instruments out of things they found out in the world. If you were a turtle, you probably gave your shell to become some type of guitar instrument. Sticks on trees became drumsticks. Animal skin from animals they were killing to eat would become a piece of head to go over a drum, or a hollowed out piece of wood that they would put a piece of pigskin over and start beating on it with sticks. They invented instruments. Well, once you invent instruments, what do you have to do? You have to figure out how to play them. So what they did not do is get books from Europe and learn how to do this. Most of them couldn't read, and if they did speak, they didn't really speak English because they weren't from America. A lot of these slaves came from Africa or from the Indies down in the South where they were being, that's a different story of history. But either way, they were coming to America, they were not American. They didn't speak English. So European books wouldn't have done them any good anyway because they'd have been written in Italian, German, French, maybe English. But England at this time was not doing so much in music. So the first fact you really need to know is jazz is truly America's first music invented by Americans with rules made up by Americans. So if you were a European musician at the time and you came to America to play and you encountered this jazz stuff, you would not know what to do with it. It would be as foreign to you as a foreign language. So what's the first fact? Don't have to say it, just think about it. America's first true music invented by Americans. So now when you do this assignment again, because we're going to do this assignment again you did yesterday, you now have a true fact to put in there. I hope you wrote that down. So let's go to the next fact you're going to need to know. Let me move the presentation one slide over. Oh, and somehow overnight my extra computer monitors quit working. So I'm having to do everything on one screen. Let's take this sentence. So your assignment coming up is going to be the same thing you did yesterday, but you're going to have more facts, and it's going to be based on this. Jazz is the spirit of the American dream because jazz is democratic. Let's think about what that means. Y'all probably heard the word democratic a lot, a democracy, the Democratic Party. Let's get rid of those definitions. This has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. This has nothing to do with American politics. Or even, since the word democracy comes from the Greek or Latin, I think it's Latin. Comes from, either way, it comes from Rome. We're not discussing that either. What democratic means in this circumstance is everybody is equal. Think about that. Everyone is equal. So jazz, all the musicians are equal. That's not the way it is in European music. In European music, some musicians are more important than the others. That's where we get the term diva from. If you're the diva, nowadays we call it, the diva is almost an insult to a girl who thinks she's too pretty or something. But the true term diva comes from Italian opera. The diva is the star lady who is the best singer. She's the most important, usually the most paid, most well paid. But in America, it was different. These slaves, who were all slaves, they were all equal to each other. So the music became democratic. So that's your second fact. Fact number one is from America. Fact number two, everyone is equal, which means democratic. So whenever you talk about this, I want you to use the word democratic to stand for everyone is equal. So that's something you definitely need to write down, that first sentence. Jazz is the spirit of the American dream because jazz is democratic. That means every voice counts. My voice is no more important than anyone else's voice in jazz. Thumbs up if that makes sense. Jazz is musical freedom created by a class of people, remember, slaves. Jazz was invented by slaves. So these are people who were not free. So what they did is invented a form of music that gives ultimate freedom to the musicians. You may not be free in your daily life, but you can be free in the music that you play. And that is uplifting. It became the reason jazz spread like wildfire through the United States and then through the entire world, because it is musical freedom. You are free from the rules of European music. We have three facts now. One, invented in America by Americans with rules invented by American, which means it is not from Europe. Number two, jazz is democratic because all the voices count. Number three, invented by slaves, so they invented music with musical freedom. So jazz is musical freedom created by a class of people who were denied freedom. I think that is incredibly ironic and powerful. It's people who were denied freedom found freedom in the music. And then their descendants took on this and ran with it. So the true great jazz musicians would not come until the early 1900s, because we had to have grandchildren and great-grandchildren of slaves be born to really push the music forward. And what they did is they went to school. They became educated in a school setting, and they were able to make the music become more educated. All right, so let's look at what it says. Music is colorblind. In this circumstance, I'm talking about jazz. And I have all these people on the screen to show that as jazz progressed into the 1900s, it left the plantation. It left the Southern Baptist Church, which is kind of where it was trapped for a while. And it spread through the United States and started taking on, or bringing into it, more gender and more race. So music itself is colorblind. If you want to be part of jazz, it doesn't matter if you're a musician or part of the audience, because we're going to learn the audience is actually a musician when it comes to jazz. So the music itself welcomes you. Musicians learn to perform together while improvising. Now, we'll get to improvising in just a second. That's going to be one of your assignments for later on in the week. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the stuff we went over the past 2 days. Well, let's back up. Let's do a quick review for those who were not here 1 day or maybe 2 days. Tuesday was the first day of school. What I asked you to do in your assignment was just to tell me everything you know about jazz in 3 to 5 sentences. And a lot of you were like, I don't know anything about jazz, except for the fact I told you beforehand, jazz is music. It was invented by slaves, and it's from the South of the United States, from our part of the United States. But then a lot of people still said, I don't know anything about jazz. But then yesterday, I gave you a short keynote with 4 slides. The 4 slides talked about some issues or some concepts in jazz. And then I had you add to your essay that you started the day before. So some of you had, I didn't know anything about jazz, so you had to change that to you had a little bit of information, and your essay went from yesterday from 3 to 5 sentences from 5 to 7. Well, your final essay that's going to be due on Tuesday is going to be 10 to 15 sentences. So basically a full paragraph. And it's going to add a little more. I'm giving you some more facts today. And then I'm going to have a rubric for you that's going to detail how you put the essay together, so you know what I'm expecting. And we're going to go over that rubric in just a second. And I'm actually going to write it in front of you, and we're going to work together to create the rubric. Because honestly, I haven't assigned an essay to a 6th grade class. I don't really remember ever assigning an essay to a 6th grade class. But I can't give y'all a multiple choice test because you can just Google the answers. So the only way to really assess what you know is to do it via essay, because you can't really Google an essay. And if you do, I'll figure it out. Okay, so we learned yesterday, or day before yesterday, whenever, that jazz is America's first form of artistic music. That means it was invented in America by Americans that did not follow the rules of European music. So at this time period, I'm just picking a year of 1850. 1850 is not when jazz was invented. It's just an easy year to remember. So if you're alive in 1850 and you were a musician, you would have followed the rules of European music, because that is the only rules that existed. The rules from Germany and Italy mainly, but then there's some England and France thrown in. A little bit of Spain. But slaves had never studied this music. They didn't know how it worked. So they invented a new way of making music, a whole new language of music. And we call that language jazz. So now when someone asks you what jazz is, you can say, well, jazz is a language of music that is completely different from Europe. So if you say classical music and jazz are the same, you could not be more wrong, because they are exact opposites. Let's keep moving forward. Since jazz was invented by slaves, these are a class of people who were unfree, denied freedom in a country where all men are created equal. So jazz became the spirit of the American dream because it is democratic. That word I want to see in everyone's essay. You are going to have the word democratic in there. And you're going to express that you understand the word democratic means all are equal. Does that make sense? Thumbs up if that makes sense. All are equal. That's why in America, we call our government a democracy. This has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. This has nothing to do with our politics in America. Democracy means all are equal. And we get that word from Rome. All right, so the next bullet, jazz is musical freedom, created by a class of people who were denied freedom. And I think this is the most powerful thing in jazz, is that it was created to give freedom in music to those who did not have freedom in life. That is incredibly ironic and incredibly powerful. And as we're going to find in the future, this music is going to directly lead to the civil rights movement, which will directly lead to Martin Luther King and LBJ getting together and signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's when it was signed. I should know that date. It may have been invented by a class of people who were unfree, but the music itself is colorblind. All are welcome to join. And as we're going to learn, in a place called Congo Square in New Orleans, slaves would gather on Sunday because Sunday was church day and you don't work on the Sabbath. And even a lot of slave masters would not force their slaves to work on Sunday because the Bible says not to do it. So the slaves were gathered together because many of them were not Christian, because Christian is not a religion typically found in Africa at the time. So they would gather on Sundays, and sometimes the slave masters or other people around would come and join in the music. So even back in its earlier days, jazz was colorblind. It was open to anyone who wanted to participate. And then the new bullet you have not seen yet. I kind of made this one last night because I wanted to better explain the last bullet about the audience. So saying y'all talking about Conga Square, and sometimes white people or mixed people would come join the slaves in their new music, which at this time would have been just more dancing and clapping and kind of singing. But it's important to know that the musicians and the audience are both participants. And that is incredibly important because in classical music from Europe, the audience was not allowed to participate. The audience was there to listen and to clap when they are supposed to. And if you clap when you're not supposed to in a classical performance, you do it one time, people might look at you like you're a little weird. You do it twice, people look at you like, okay, you need to figure out what's going on. If you do it a few times, they may ask you to leave the auditorium because you're not supposed to make any noise when the musicians are playing. You even try not to cough or sneeze, try to hold it in because that would interrupt the performance for other people. That's not the way jazz is. Jazz, you're supposed to be up in your seats, dancing, clapping, yelling. The audience is supposed to participate. And that's the next bullet. This makes jazz different than European classical music, where the audience is expected to sit quietly and obey the rules of how to be an educated member of the audience. That's what's cool about jazz. You're not supposed to be an educated member of the audience. You're just supposed to be a member of the audience. There are no rules to follow as an audience member, except to participate. An educated member of the audience, only clapping when the rules allow. All right, so this is just a quick review of all the bullets kind of thrown into one slide. So if you have not been taking notes, this is definitely the slide you want to have a copy of, because your essay is going to need to have all this stuff in it. So as you're writing your essay, it's going to be 10 to 15 sentences. I will be looking for every one of these bullets to be mentioned. Don't use my exact words because that is copying me. Put it in your own words. So I want you to express that you understand it's America's first true form of artistic music. That it's colorblind. No, you don't have to say colorblind, but you need to say that it doesn't care about your race or your gender or your age. It is democratic. I will want to see the word democratic in your essay. In a second, when I'm writing the rubric, we're going to write this rubric together. So there is no doubt what I expect from you. I want to see the word democratic, and I want you to say all voices are equal. That's one time you can copy me. It was invented by slaves who were denied freedom in a country where all men are born free as a type of musical freedom. All are welcome to join in, both the musicians and the audience. And early jazz is by nature the opposite of European classical music. So a few of you said jazz and classical music are the same thing. That could not be further from the right answer. They are completely opposites. So now let's make a rubric together. Now you don't need to copy this rubric down because I'm going to put it in Google Classroom in just a moment, but I'm just going to make sure we write it together. So far we have the student will write 10 to 15 sentences. You already have 7 if you've done the max of the essay. Because it was 3 to 5 the first time, 5 to 7. So most of you should have at least 5 sentences. But a lot of you should have at least 7. Because I was hoping you'd work all the way to the max. But either way, you got to have 10 to 15. These sentences, this is important. You're in 6th grade, so these sentences must be full, complete, and correct. No fragments or run-ons. If you do not know what a fragment or a run-on is, please put that in the comments and you and I can talk about that. Because I will be grading you on having complete sentences. So I'm assuming everybody understands the difference between a correct sentence, a fragment, and a run-on. That's the only grammar I'm expecting you to deal with, other than, periods and capitals at the beginning of a sentence and that type of stuff. I'll put that in here in just a sec. I should just go ahead and add that. Punctuation. Sentences must have a capital. Sentences must have a capital letter at the beginning and a period at the end. Man, that's just first and second grade stuff. But some of the essays, y'all were not doing that. Especially the capital letter at the beginning. I mean, is it really so hard to hit shift so you have a capital letter? All right, students will have all topics from the keynote, and I'm listing them right now. I don't have them all listed, but here are the topics. First, artistic music, colorblind. Now, remember, you don't have to actually use the words colorblind, but the concept that the music is not for any one race, gender, or age is invented by slaves. It has musical freedom. All are welcome to join in. And it's the opposite of European classical music. When I say European classical music, I mean people like Mozart, Beethoven, opera, and the music that comes from Europe. Student will use the word democratic correctly to describe the music because all voices are equal. Now you're allowed to say this, democratic because all voices are equal. You may use that quote. All right, does anybody have a question of how the rubric is going to work? This will count as a major grade. Every, I gotta break out a way to actually grade things. So let's, minus 5 points for every fragment or run on. Minus 5 points. Minus 5 points per sentence not there. So if you give me an 8-sentence essay, you're going to lose 10 points for not having 2 sentences. Minus 5 points if you don't have a capital at the beginning of a sentence. Ooh, proper nouns. You have someone's name, or if you have a place, say you say New Orleans for some reason, New Orleans has to have a capital letter. So minus 5 for proper noun error. There are 7 topics. Minus 15 points for topic not mentioned. Minus 20 for not using democratic. Is that fair? Okay, Terrence, what's not fair about it? I mean, I want to discuss this. If this is not fair, please let's fix it. I want to make it where we agree. This is how it's going to be. So if you have an issue with any of this, either speak forward now or put it in the comments. Because just shaking your head no doesn't count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, this is going into Google Classroom just like this. I'm creating the assignment right now, and you may get started as soon as it comes to you. Okay, so this is just titled Essay 1, Major Grade. I have the rubric underneath it. We've discussed what the expectations are. The due date is going to be Tuesday, so I'm going to put that in. Tuesday the 15th, and it is due when class starts at 8:30. Go to Google Classroom, get to work right now.